wonderful speakers from local organizations. Isa Pena of the Innovation Law Lab, Ellie Glukowski of the Oregon for All Coalition, and Carla Castaneda of the VOS Workers' Rights Education Project. Their presentations will be followed by a Q&A period and short closing remarks. Welcome again. Let's dive right in. I'd like to introduce two members of IJAG, Marianne Barham and Lena Lee, who will be our moderators for the panel and the Q&A.
Sorry, I'm still not used to Zoom. Amina, can you spotlight the speakers? I know you're frantically letting people in, but great, thank you. My name's Marianne, and thank you, Ethel, for the introduction. I would just like to talk a little bit about the forum and the panel, and the Q&A. So our goal is to inform people about the current situation and legal issues and experiences of those who are actually living here as immigrants. We will ask the participants to hold their questions till our Q&A period. Each of the speakers will have 20 minutes, and then we will take questions in the chat, and Lena Lee, who is one of the moderators, will share those questions with our panelists during the chat, or she'll read them out of the chat and share them. We are planning 2 subsequent sessions, one focusing on legislative advocacy and another one we have yet to plan. So this evening, we're definitely hoping that people gain a lot of information about what's happening with our immigrant neighbors, and knowing that this information will help you in the future. I'm sure there'll be some tips on what to do. And we also have a list of resources that we'll share with you at the end of the event and also email to you tomorrow. So I'm going to introduce Isa Pena, who's our first panelist, and Ellie Gulowski. I think they're doing their presentation together.
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for letting us join you all today. As folks mentioned, my name is Isa Pena. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I am the Director of Strategy at Innovation Law Lab. I am also a steering committee member for the Oregon for All Coalition, and also the Oregon Worker Relief Coalition. But my most proudest title is that I am the proud daughter of 2 undocumented Oregonians that will likely be targeted by the this new administration and their tactics. And so really just wanted to thank you all for allowing us to join you all today to talk about how to support our immigrant community. And I'll let my colleague Ellie introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ellie Gluhusky. I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, I'm the new Oregon for All Coalition Manager. Thank you so much again just for providing the space for us to share the work of the coalition with you. I actually grew up in a very, very small but passionate Unitarian fellowship in my hometown. And it's where I learned, a lot of my most foundational lessons on community support and mutual aid and solidarity. So having the opportunity to present to you all feels all the more meaningful. So thank you all.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So I just quickly wanted to share a little bit of goals for our collective presentation. One is to provide an overview of Oregon's political landscape, just give you all just a sense of where we are in Oregon politically right now, and then introduce you all to the Oregon for All Coalition. And the third goal is to really build support for our ecosystem and our priorities and share with you all what we have been working on and how you all can plug into that work. Next slide. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the Oregon's immigrant justice context. Next slide. But before I jump into kind of where we are right now, I just wanted to remind us, as you all may have been involved in a lot of these fights in the past, but Oregon has fought for immigrants and refugees for many, many decades. We have the oldest and strongest statewide sanctuary laws in the nation. Um, and our sanctuary laws basically say that our state and local resources, which include our police and our sheriffs, cannot be used to aid federal immigration enforcement efforts. And so we have initially passed that law in 1987, but since then have passed an array of bills and different laws to help support our immigrant and refugee community here in Oregon. Some examples of those laws are things like tuition equity and cover all kids and cover all people, things that provide uh, uh, health insurance as well as driver's licenses and um, things like strengthening our existing sanctuary law, as well as the passage of universal representation, which provides free immigration legal services. Additionally, passing things like farm worker overtime that allows farm workers to be paid fair wages. And so we have a long history here in Oregon of remarkable achievements by and for our immigrant community. And their allies and supporters have made Oregon really a leader among some states to be a beacon of hope for our immigrant community. Next slide. And so we know that as we are a beacon of hope for our immigrant community, our values and our achievements in supporting our immigrant community really make us a target for Trump and the administration. We know that the Trump administration has said that they want to deport 20 million or more immigrants, and that scale of mass deportation really would require a large scale detention camps, things that we have not seen um, in the recent years. And so we know that, from his first administration, Trump deported over 200,000 people and has threatened to deport many, many more in this new administration. In doing that, we know that he actually is now threatening to deport whole families, even families with family members with citizenship and other documented status. And the potential magnitude of these threats really can impact a large scale amount of individuals. But what we know is that they currently do not have sufficient federal immigration personnel to carry out the magnitude of deportations that they have been threatening. And so, to get this done, they are going to need the cooperation of local police and sheriffs or the military to potentially um, reach the levels that they want to reach. And so, we know that Trump is attacking more basic rights and more people this time around, and has issued a significant amount of executive orders in the last week to target our immigrant communities. Next slide. And prior to Trump coming into office, we had already heard rumors that Trump was going to use two very distinct laws to help him kind of achieve the things that he wanted to do. One of which was the Insurrection Act, which really gives the president authority to deploy the military, including the National Guard, if and when the president perceives or declares that there is an insurrection happening. And so we know that if there are protests, or major actions and there is political violence, the administration has already said that they would use that as a way to indicate that insurrection is happening, to be able to deploy the military or the National Guard. The administration also said prior to taking office that they would use things like the Alien Enemies Act, which permits the detention and the deportation of civilians mainly merely on the basis of their ancestry. This was the law that was used during Japanese internment to essentially declare that somebody is that an invasion is happening and that alien enemies need to be detained or deported from the country. And so we have been very vigilant in the last week or so to make sure that they are not leveraging these laws to increase their attacks on our community. Next slide. So our coalition had intel that the Trump team had prepared over 150 executive orders to sign on day one. And we know that he has already signed about 40 of them on that day, many of which carried out a lot of his campaign threats. Things like declaring a national emergency at the southern border, requesting the U.S. military to draft a plan to send troops to the border, to repel forms of invasion that included mass migration, and other criminal activities. They ended things like the CVP1 app, which was what the government was using to process asylum claims. They've also attempted to redefine and get rid of birthright citizenship. They fired acting directors, chief immigration judges, general counsel, and folks that were spearheading immigration policy in the courts. They also have increased domestic enforcement and withholding, and have threatened to withhold federal funds from non-cooperating local agencies and states, and so much more. All of these have been harmful executive orders, many of which we have already our partners or other attorney generals have tried to challenge in the courts to ensure that we can protect our community. And another thing that he has already done in kind of the first week is get rid of the secure locations memo, which made it so that churches, schools, and courthouses were places that ICE could not conduct their business. And so we are actively working on preparing schools, churches, and courthouses to continue to be these secure locations and how to fight back against some of these harmful executive orders. Next slide. Additionally, on top of the new executive orders, we also saw a few things happen in Congress, like the Lincoln-Riley Act. That it was the first immigration bill of this new Congress, and it would require the government to imprison people who pose no risk to their communities. For low-level violations, things like shoplifting, it would require their imprisonment, even if there was no conviction. And so the bill allows for hostile state officials to sue the federal government when they disapprove of an immigration decision, causing even more chaos and inviting more politicized lawsuits. And this has already passed in both the House and the Senate. We also know that there is an anticipated bill that will likely be introduced in early February that will try to take away federal funding from states with sanctuary laws that may be targeting states like Oregon. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Justice this week, the acting attorney general issued a letter basically threatening to criminalize state and local officials who do not aid federal immigration enforcement processes. There are a couple of links that we can share later on in the chat, and attorney sharing that attorney general's letter as well as the ACLU's response to that letter, and how those threats are actually not supported by the law. Next slide. Additionally, here in Oregon, and in many states, we know that there's critical work that needs to be done at the federal level, but also here locally. As we mentioned, Oregon has some of the strongest and oldest sanctuary laws. And even with these laws, we know that our local police and sheriffs, even on an individual basis, sometimes decide to disregard our state law. We are unsure that we have sufficient measures to prevent the police and sheriffs from actually disregarding the law, and have a sanctuary promise kind of hotline where people can report violations. But we are doing work to see what other things we can do to really strengthen our accountability measures for any police and sheriffs who may want to violate our state sanctuary law. We know that in the past, white nationalist groups have tried to infiltrate police and sheriff departments. And so we are actively looking into finding ways to make sure that we can hold local police and sheriffs accountable if they violate our state sanctuary law. Next slide, please. As I've been sharing a lot of the things that the new president has done, one of the first things that he did was also to pardon more than 1,500 people who were charged or convicted under federal laws for attacking the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Some of the people who received pardons live in Oregon, or in close proximity in Washington, and some are leaders of groups like the Proud Boys. It is a reality that there are white supremacists and hate groups here in Oregon and in close proximity. And we know that agencies like the FBI have warned for years that one of the strategies of these groups was to infiltrate our law enforcement agencies. And so it's worrisome that, with the release of with all of those pardons, that we will see increased harassment or violence against immigrant Oregonians and Oregon communities. And we may even see them try to instigate counter protests in our state that then would give Trump the pretext of sending federal law enforcement as he did in 2020. And could give him the pretext to send in the military and say that an insurrection is happening. And once the military is here, use that for things like immigration enforcement. And so we really want to watch out for anything of that nature. Next slide. And so I know I've just shared a lot of really heavy information about the political context that we are kind of facing in this time. And we just, want to make sure that everyone uses this slide as a breather. We know that this information is heavy, but feels very relevant and important that we share all of that with you all. Next slide. And I will just end with Again, the slide of all of the victories and things that we have won over the last several years for our immigrant community. While I did share a lot of really scary information of what already is happening and the different attacks that we anticipate seeing, Oregon has done a very good job at creating laws that protect our immigrant neighbors and communities, and want to remind us that Oregon leans towards fairness, and we will continue to do that by pushing for strong laws that protect our immigrant communities. Next slide. And I'll actually pass it over to Ellie, who's going to talk about the Oregon for All Coalition.
Thank you, Isa. Yeah, so following Isa, I'm just here to represent the coalition itself, the Oregon for All Coalition. This is a statewide coordinated response to the current administration's attack on Oregon immigrant communities. And it's really a response to, this context that Isa was just sharing about. It's actually a reiteration of the One Oregon Coalition, which was formed during the first Trump administration and has kind of been reconfigured to better meet the political and social realities of this moment specifically. But since the One Oregon Coalition was formed in 2017, we have years of narrative and community research, as well as these concrete wins that Isa was mentioning that we can really draw from and lean on and learn from in this new context. Some of those major victories in the immigrant justice space in Oregon from the past 8 years have been because, or in part because of the coordination of the One Oregon Coalition. So it's really evident to us that we can accomplish a lot when we are in coordination with the incredible communities and organizations doing this work across the state. So this is our steering committee. We are made up of 8 organizations, all of who have a shared focus on protecting not only immigrant and refugee communities in Oregon, but also all marginalized and oppressed communities in Oregon. These organizations are APANO, the Oregon Food Bank, ACLU of Oregon, PCUN, Unite Oregon, SEIU, Local 503, Innovation Law Lab, and the Oregon Just Transition Alliance. So we really have a broad mission that focuses on advancing immigrant and refugee justice to build a more welcoming and prosperous state through education, research organizing, and political advocacy, as well as a strategy that aims to leverage our collective power to reject anti-immigrant policies at all levels of government, advance a proactive vision for immigrant inclusion and success, and demonstrate that hate and violence have no place in our politics or in our communities. Really in our messaging, what we're trying to be really adamant about and really drive home is that Oregon is home. Immigrant Oregonians are our family members, they're our neighbors, our friends, our classmates, our colleagues, and they're a part of what makes the state strong and beautiful. Immigrant Oregonians have helped to make our state and our country thrive. There are teachers, lawmakers, essential workers, business owners, farm workers, and clergy, and they deserve the state's protection at all cost. Oops, there we go. So our current strategic priorities, which have been determined by our steering committee, which are really what we're going to be focusing most of our efforts on in these first 6 to 12 months of the administration, are to 1, provide cross-organization statewide coordination, 2, to reshape the narrative around immigrants and refugee communities in the state through our coordinated comms strategy work, and then finally to develop and coordinate a statewide rapid response network. We do have the intention to support some of the policy work that our partner allies are leading, specifically around the immigrant rights justice package in the Oregon legislature, but at this time, we don't have the capacity to be a policy lead, so we're really kind of deferring to our partners to lead that work. Although I did want to mention this slide, which just has some of the details of what's in that immigrant justice package that we're pushing for in this legislative session. The package includes farm worker disaster relief fund, universal representation, a home fund, Indigenous language justice, and food for all Oregonians. So yeah, we're really encouraging all of our partners to really support this work and lean into the organizations that are leading some of like the testimony messaging and just the messaging overall about these policy campaigns. So here's kind of a broad list of the things we've accomplished so far. This number at the beginning here that says 40 plus coalition members, this is no longer accurate since this number is growing daily. We actually have over 70 organizations who have joined on and endorsed our coalition, and that number is growing every day. We obviously hired a coalition manager, which is me. I started in December. And yeah, just having a dedicated staff person to really take on some of the structure has been really essential for this coordinated work. We've also organized 2 roundtables on safeguarding community organizations and other ally institutions against potential federal attacks. And then we had a community briefing, not last week, I think, but the week before, where we brought together community leaders from across the state to just, again, start this like coordinated effort. As part of our strategic priorities, we have formed 2 subcommittees, one to focus on our narrative strategy and our communications work, and one to focus on building out that rapid response infrastructure. Both of these are, again, focused on bridging together the organizations and partners across the state who are already doing this work and just make sure that we, have a strong and coordinated effort that's in collaboration with each other. And then we are focused a lot on funding right now, of course. We recently secured $100,000 for our rapid response work. But of course, that's just a drop in the bucket of what the money is we need to fund this work long term. So that's a big priority for us as well. And then finally, we launched our website, which is really exciting. It's OregonForAll.us. I definitely encourage folks to check that out. It's going to be kind of the centralized location where we're storing all of our resources. There's also a button on the website to sign up to receive our email updates so you all can stay up to date with our work as it moves forward. And I did just want to mention, since we are at the beginning of this iteration of the work, the structure of this coalition is really still coming together and the coordination is still very much in process, especially since we are having to kind of adapt our response and adapt our structure in real time as we settle into, the unpredictable rhythm of this administration. So we're really relying on our legal partners like Innovation Law Lab and ACLU to give us really solid analysis of the credible threats coming to our community, just to ensure that, the things we're responding to are real threats rather than engaging in political theater. And we're also really committed to pacing ourselves. This first week and a half of this administration has been really exhausting. People's capacity and nervous systems are already really stretched. So we acknowledge that, while there is time-sensitive work that we're trying to get in place, specifically our rapid response work, we're also really trying to focus on the marathon and not the sprint. But because we're trying to pace, there's some tension around how we're building a structure that can carry us through the next 4 years. Right now, we are primarily concerned with organizational coordination, but this is almost definitely going to change in the future. We, especially since we recognize that faith groups such as yourselves and churches have really provided a lot of the support for this work in the past. So we really want to figure out meaningful ways to engage with you all as well, especially when we have more of a structure built that can accommodate individual support and support outside of, just affiliated organizations. We are officially planning to launch our coalition on February 13th. So if you are a part of an organization that is invested in this work, definitely feel free to get in touch with me about endorsing and joining that first coalition meeting. And I did just here at the end want to share just a few resources. Again, this is not an extensive list, and I encourage folks to visit our website and keep up to date with the website, as that, again, is going to be the home for a lot of these documents. But of course, I want to reiterate the Know Your Rights material and trainings that have become really present in all of our communities. I encourage folks to attend a training and just get that necessary information for your own families and so you can better support your communities. We're also always uplifting the Equity Corps of Oregon, the ECHO network, which is the legal network we're relying on for universal representation, which really steps in the situation that an individual or a family has an ICE encounter or just like needs that legal support. We always rely on the Oregon Worker Relief Fund, which was briefly mentioned earlier. But that Worker Relief Fund has helped thousands of immigrants across the state of Oregon. So we're going to continue to rely on that as a resource moving forward. And then I mentioned this, and Isa mentioned this too, but we're putting together some toolkits that are specific to different spaces that folks might have to engage with ICE or have a heightened interaction. So we're putting together some toolkits such as safeguarding our organizations, and there's a safeguarding schools toolkit coming out in the next week. The Oregon Attorney General has provided a sanctuary toolkit as well, so folks can just make sure they really understand the purpose of sanctuary law and how that should be being enforced. And then finally, just again, along with our comms strategizing and coordination, we're developing some messaging and media relations support along with our website, social media, and a rapid response communications toolkit. We actually have a messaging and spokesperson training happening next week for the purpose of folks to if they're planning on being a spokesperson for their community, specifically with the media, it's an opportunity for folks to come and get trained on our narrative strategy, as well as some strategies for just engaging with media. So if anyone's interested in that, again, feel free to reach out to me after this. I'll definitely provide my contact info. And there will be other coalition trainings that we're hoping to put on again in the coming months. And those updates are definitely going to be sent out through the website sign up. So again, I just encourage folks, if you want to stay up to date with like the work we're doing and the trainings we're offering, to just sign up for our emails. And that's really it. I appreciate again the time to just talk about the work we're doing. And I guess the last thing I'll say, again, just because I recognize that the information I shared is a little bit more applicable to organizational support. So I just encourage folks on an individual level at this time to, take an assessment of your own capacity and your own connection to community, so that when the time comes to really plug folks into our rapid response network to help support families that have been destabilized by a raid or arrest, we need to know that folks have done kind of their internal work to prepare themselves to step in as soon as that call goes out. So that when the call goes out, just getting ready to attend trainings and skill up so that you can take part in protecting the state and our communities from the violence that's really alive around us, which is kind of a hard thing to end with. But again, I just appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
This is Mary Ann. I have a couple follow-up questions that I think maybe a lot of people in the room are interested in, but a couple, maybe I'll start with Isa. Isa, we talked a lot about the Oregon for All Coalition, but would you talk specifically about Innovation Law Lab? Just your history and specifically what your organization does? I think would be some interest in learning more about that.
Sure, happy to. So Innovation Law Lab is an organization of lawyers, coders, and advocates fighting for immigrant and refugee justice. We started in 2014, really trying to, this was when we started seeing an increase in family detention, and once detention centers were kind of incarcerating and detaining families at the border, Innovation Law Lab stepped in, and since then has been using law and technology and advocacy to really advance immigrant and refugee justice. And so some of the work that we've done here in Oregon is things like when we saw folks be detained in Sheridan, Innovation Law Lab filed a lawsuit to be able to intervene and actually represent the people that were being detained in Sheridan. And then with the help of community, we're able to release folks into kind of our kind of state infrastructure and then be able to help those folks receive things like asylum. Innovation Law Lab currently is the clearinghouse for all of Oregon Work Relief programs, including the Equity Corps of Oregon program. And what I mean by the clearinghouse is that we actually play the logistics coordinator of those programs. So for worker relief, Oregon Worker Relief was a program that started in the pandemic, really to provide one-time payments for immigrant communities who were not receiving things like the stimulus payments. And so Innovation Law Lab created the technology to have a statewide application for people to apply and receive those benefits. And through kind of our collective community work, we have been able to, through the Worker Relief Network, create a variety of different programs like the Home Fund, like the Climate Change Fund, like the Indigenous Language Justice Fund, all of which provide direct financial assistance to our immigrant communities. And since 2020 have delivered nearly $200 million in aid to our communities. And so we've been able to do that. And Innovation Law Lab, as I mentioned, was kind of like the logistical support and developed the technology for Oregon Worker Relief. And one of the programs of Oregon Worker Relief is this Equity Corps of Oregon program, which was born out of the Universal Representation Bill, Senate Bill 1543, that passed in 2022. And so Innovation Law Lab kind of takes in any calls of anybody that wants to receive free immigration legal services, and we refer cases to other attorneys and make sure that there is a kind of centralized and coordinated attorney system. And we refer people all over the state, as well as train up any nonprofit that wants to become a legal service provider. We do a lot of capacity building work with new nonprofits, like, for example, Adelante Mujeres, who wasn't a legal service provider before, but through kind of the capacitation of universal representation and our collaboration, now has an attorney on their staff and is taking on kind of cases. We've done that with Latino Community Association as well, out in Bend. And the idea is that our organization provides the logistical support so that we can grow a statewide infrastructure for legal services. So that's just a little bit about what Law Lab does.
Yeah, you said a little bit of clarification. Just I'm not even sure if I can define universal representation. So would you clarify that for everybody? It sounds like so much of what you do is kind of built on that law that passed a couple of years. So would you explain it a little more and then talk a little bit more about the Equity Corps?
Yeah, so universal representation is the idea that everybody who needs a lawyer should get a lawyer. As you all may know, immigration is not considered immigrating to this country is not a criminal offense, it's a civil offense. And yet, when the government is seeking to deport you, you're actually not afforded an attorney like you would in a criminal conviction. And so, the idea of universal representation is that people who are facing deportation or needing to adjust their status, that they actually get a attorney. And so the law passed in 2022 really allowed for funding to create this program. And the program does a few different things. So it creates a statewide call center and a clearinghouse that coordinates the entire program. It provides capacity dollars for existing nonprofits through the Oregon State Bar. It also created capacity to create new or legal service providing organizations at community-based organizations to ensure that there were culturally specific and culturally responsive organizations in areas where maybe community-based organizations already existed, but legal service providers didn't. And that kind of fostered the growth of organizations that are now legal service providers, like as I mentioned, Adelante Mujeres and Latino Community Association, UNETE. That has kind of fostered that. The other thing is that it allows for any type of immigration matter. So it's not just folks who are detained and in removal proceedings, but if let's say there's a taquista and they're eligible for adjustment of status and want to change their status or apply to be a permanent resident because they're eligible to do so, then universal representation and the Equity Corps of Oregon system allows them to do that. And so universal representation is the law and the campaign that passed, but Equity Corps is the name of the program. And that's just because it was hard for people to, distinguish the two, and ECHO is a pretty easy name for people to understand in many languages. So that's why it's called Equity Corps.
Thanks, Isa. We have a few more minutes, and I had one question for Ellie, but I also wanted to remind everybody that we'll have a chance for Q&A, so everybody here will be able to ask questions of our presenters too. But Ellie, would you just take a couple minutes to talk about what rapid response work is? Because you talked about building that out, just clarifying how you would envision that working.
Yeah, so rapid response is basically what the structure that is in place for when an ICE enforcement incident occurs with a person. So that can mean an arrest, an individual arrest, or a raid, as well as like any other sort of like hostile ICE interaction. Once that situation is documented and verified, there will be a network in place that will deploy folks to respond to that situation. So I see there's a question in the chat about this as well. An example of like someone who would be deployed in a volunteer capacity would be someone like a legal observer, someone who would go and be at the situation and literally will just observe and document for the purpose of having the situation, just be documented for further use in the future after the situation has been stabilized. Another example of when a volunteer would be deployed would be like a literal interrupter of the situation. So community members who would go and literally like protest or stand physically in between like a federal officer and a family member. There's also, there can be a volunteer who would be a spokesperson, so would be primarily there gathering information for the purpose of communicating that to the media if that has been determined, through risk assessment to be something the family wants to do. So there's lots of different ways that volunteers can be deployed, but the purpose of rapid response is to protect the individual or the people who are in a hostile situation with ICE and need protection immediately. So that's why it's rapid response, because the purpose of it is to be immediate protection for the family. Once a situation is stabilized, there is, the part of rapid response, that's the aftermath. So that's, helping the family further stabilize after the incident has ended. And that can be providing legal services as well.
Okay, so I think we have time to move on to Carla from both. So thank you, Isa and Ellie. That was really helpful. And there will be an opportunity for people to ask you questions after we hear from Carla. So welcome, Carla. How are you today?
Hey y'all, thanks for having me today.
you have 20 minutes to talk about your organization and then what you could share with us about the experiences of the immigrants that you're working with. And like I said, then there'll be questions and answers after that. So thank you.
Awesome, sounds good. Well, thank you, Isa and Ellie, also for presenting and laying out some foundational work around what's happening here in Oregon. First, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Carla Castañeda. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the executive director at VOS Workers' Rights Education Project. For those of you that don't know VOS, it's an organization here in Portland, and it's one of a kind. So there's no other organization like VOS. We serve day laborers and domestic workers, and the identities that our workers carry are, undocumented asylum seekers, folks that have a criminal record, houseless, are part of the LGBTQ community, just to have a ton of identities are very marginalized. So we have about 3 different programs here at VOS. We have a worker center, which is one of our biggest programs, both started by day laborers, in the way to fight against exploitation and criminalization by police and by immigration as well. So a lot of the time, day laborers are usually at a corner or like in front of Home Depot or Lowe's and are seeking work, but they were experiencing a huge volume of wage theft cases, exploitation of their labor, just horrible working conditions. And they gathered up together in the 90s and were like, this isn't okay. We're also being harassed and targeted by the police and immigration. Like, we have to fight back. And they developed VOS as an organization. And our worker center it's our biggest program where we connect day laborers to employment opportunities. So homeowners, contractors, companies will call VOS up and they'll want to hire a day laborer for the day. All of our workers go out for a minimum of $20 an hour. Of course, that increases depending on the skill or the type of labor that they're going to be doing. And no one goes out for less than 4 hours of work. So if you get assigned to a job, you're guaranteed 4 hours or more. Again, that's not very sustainable because it's really, the cost of living in Portland is very expensive. And being a day laborer, you get day jobs and the work is never guaranteed. But that's one of our biggest programs. It's really run by the members themselves. We open Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. And you have the opportunity to, just hire workers for any type of project. So if you need a worker for your home or a friend, please tell them to call our center. And I only want to pitch that because I think that, the world is filled with so much uncertainty right now, and folks are even so terrified about going out to work. And employers don't know the risk they're taking around picking up a day labor, which has really impacted our workforce, particularly at VOS. Usually in a day we have 50 people show up at our day labor center, and right now we're having 28 to 38, which is still a lot of humans, but just not our normal amount. And also, employers are just not hiring workers at the moment. And we're trying to analyze why that is. This week and a half has been really hard for a lot of communities, emotionally, but also there's just so much happening around folks' ability to continue surviving. So just want to know, again, if you want to hire workers, you can call our center. You can also hire online. And I think that's a way that an individual can support, hire in solidarity, like hire immigrant workers. We have a ton of workers available for work. The other program that we have is leadership and education. And that's because a lot of things are happening so fast. And not everyone has access to the same type of materials or language. Right now we're serving 12 different languages at our organization. And folks from all over the world. So originally VOS just served folks from, or predominantly served folks from Mexico or Central and South America. But right now we're serving really anyone and everyone. Our membership has increased to 12 different languages, including languages from West Africa, Afghanistan, Asia, and India, which has made it really difficult, especially when folks are coming from different countries that we don't have access to, or language that we don't have access to. So we have a group of folks from West Africa who speak Wolof, and that's an indigenous language. It's close to French, but not really, and it's just really hard to communicate with folks, yet we're not turning them away and trying to make sure that they also get access to the right information around political information, kind of what Isa and Ellie did in the beginning, letting them know all of that information and letting them know how they can actively participate. We also have a cohorts around emergency preparedness and disaster preparedness. I'm sure y'all have heard about the fires that are happening in California, in Pasadena, Los Angeles. And if y'all are also aware, there's an organization called the National Day Labor Network, which WOS is a founding member of. But that organization has their own day labor center in Pasadena, and they just been rallying day laborers, to clean up the community, going out to residential homes, to commercial areas, and cleaning out all of the branches, all of the burned material that is happening. And, they're doing all of that with their own tools, with their own time, not getting compensated. Yet you're also seeing raids happening in California and targeting undocumented communities, which is really upsetting, mainly because we know that jornaleros, which are day laborers, undocumented folks, are doing so much for the community and making sure that they show up and do the work. So we have our program where we do a lot of political education, making sure they know what is happening in the world, how to be connected. With this emergency preparedness cohort, we also teach them how to support in natural disasters, and a lot of them are certified to show up in these disasters, including mental health, because everything that we do it in a holistic way. So a lot of them are certified also within mental health response during an emergency disaster. And just climate change and environmental justice is so important for a day labor and domestic worker, as they are often working outside in hazardous conditions, and they're not invited in discussions around environmental justice or how to make real political change or real decision making within our communities around environmental justice. So we're trying to set the landscape for our folks and really make sure that they are the ones that are speaking up, and that we follow their voices. The last one is we do have an organizing program. And originally VOS did a lot of immigrant and workers' rights work. But due to, I saw in the chat, we've gone through fires, both literally and figuratively. So the city granted VOS in 2008 a lot on Everett and MLK in the Lloyd Center district. But due to a lot of safety concerns, just VOS got pushed out. And when we asked the city to give us some, give us some resources around security, as well as Prosper Portland, they said, no, that's your problem, which made it really hard to function because our members were getting attacked, our staff was getting attacked, and it was just not safe to continue that there. So we moved to Prescott in 102nd, and then it was part of an arson attack, which left our office on fire and put VOS in a displaced place. So we are finally at Broadway in 3635th, right on the Hollywood district. And if y'all want to stop by,
I think Carla cut out. I don't know what happened.
Carla, did you?
She may have lost her connection.
I think so.
Yeah, Carla's
Well,
not in the Zoom room right now. I'm sure she's trying to come back in.
yeah, let's give her a minute. And just to reiterate something that was put in the chat, we've created a pretty extensive resource list that we're going to share with you. It has names of a lot of grassroots organizations locally and regionally, and their websites. And so we would encourage you to explore all these different services and resources and organizations that are working with immigrants. They all have different roles they play, and they all are probably looking for volunteers or financial support. So that's going to come to you in the chat, and then we'll definitely mail it to everybody who registered. So
I would like to propose, I think we should move on to questions, and when Carla shows up, we can give her the room.
I would agree, Lena.
Okay, so, thank you, Mary Ann.
Lena's going to moderate the net. She's reading the questions in the chat. So Lena, do you want to just read them and ask them directly to our panelists? And can we highlight the two panelists who are still here? That work, Lena?
Yes, that will work fine. So while we're waiting for some questions to appear in the chat, let me ask Isa and Ellie, in a sentence or two, could you tell us what your dream or your aspirational goal for your organization would be for the next year or two?
That's such a tough question. When you were kind of saying my dream, like for I thought immediately about long-term dream, and I think long-term dream, I actually want to work myself out of a job. I hope and dream that we don't actually need organizations to be doing this type of work, that our immigrant communities are treated fairly, and that, we wouldn't need to advocate for them in a particular way because there would be justice for all of us. But I know that we can't achieve that within a year, which is what you kind of shared. And so I think kind of the dream is really to make sure that we are as coordinated as possible with other community-based organizations, with other churches, unions, anybody who wants to be an ally for our immigrant community. I think we all know that the next 4 years are going to be especially hard on our immigrant community. And I think my hope and dream is that we can all work together collectively to really prevent the deportation of any Oregonian and any immigrant, and that we're really fighting back together to be able to protect our communities.
Thank you, Isa. Ellie, what have you got to say?
I don't know if I have too much to add to that. That really summed up, the dream of Oregon for all, and what we're here trying to accomplish is, just broad protection for our communities and our people. And in the next year, I would really like to see those efforts be, really coordinated to the point where anyone in the state of Oregon who wants to connect with this work knows how and has a relatively straightforward path to engagement with our work.
Thank you both. We do actually have some questions now. Could you provide a little more information about the immigrant policy package in the Oregon legislature? That's one of the questions, and I can't be more specific than that, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the immigrant justice package is a package that was born out of the Oregon Worker Relief Network and Coalition. And the package really tries to address kind of the full scope of things that affect our immigrant community. And so some of the things that are in the package are additional funding for universal representation, which is that free immigration legal services program that I mentioned earlier. Additional investments in our home fund, which the home fund provides 2 months worth of rental assistance to anyone who is housing unstable or facing eviction. And so people just need to call and apply, and they get 2 months worth of rent if they are kind of going through a tough situation. It also includes funding for the Indigenous Language Justice Campaign, which that is to add additional language proficiency mechanisms or language proficiency tests to our existing certifications. I don't know if you all know, but to become a interpreter for things like hospitals or courthouses, you have to be qualified or certified. But right now there are no tests for Indigenous languages, and so we want to add tests for Indigenous language speakers so that they can actually be qualified and certified and actually provide interpretation and get paid for that interpretation. Right now, people are providing that interpretation just on their own, or the individual is paying for that. And so we want to create the testing mechanism so that they can be qualified or certified and get paid livable wages. The other thing is the Farm Worker Disaster Relief Fund that is geared at providing uh, financial assistance to anyone who is working in extreme heat or smoke or any weather condition for an agricultural worker who is working in those conditions to be able to provide additional financial support for their family. I mentioned Home Fund Europe. Oh, and the last one is the Food for All Oregonians, and that would be providing access to SNAP benefits for our immigrant community, which is something that they currently cannot access. And so the package really aims to address the kind of full breadth of housing, food, legal services to support our immigrant community. And as a part of that package, we're doing a lot of work to monitor and ensure that we can protect our existing state sanctuary law. There are several bills that have been introduced at the legislature to try to repeal our state sanctuary law. So as a part of that effort is also to make sure that those bills do not advance in the legislature.
Thank you, Isa. Ellie, do you have anything to add before we go back to Carla? I see that she has joined us. Okay, thank you. Carla, if you'd like to be on, please put
Yeah,
your video. Can you put your video on, or does that not work?
no, my internet is just like done with me today. I am so sorry, y'all.
That's
I
okay.
tried and it won't let me.
Yeah.
So go ahead and just share whatever you need to share, because you were sort of in the middle before you got taken
Cut off.
away.
Yeah, well, thanks for hanging in there, y'all. Really appreciate it. I was talking about our organizing program, and FOS has a history of organizing around immigrant workers' rights, but again, a lot of fires, both figuratively and literally. Now we're in a stable location on Broadway. Again, y'all are more than welcome to stop by at our center. We're open 6 days a week. Right now, in these last 2 years, we took a deep dive into wage theft and our wage theft clinic in this program, and we recovered $13,000 in total in the last year and a half, which is a huge win for a lot of workers, making sure that they get their, their compensation for the work that they did. And we did that through a lot of different strategies, both grassroots and with legal support. So we partner with Northwest Justice Project, which is a really amazing organization, as well as Oregon Law Center. When we couldn't move forward with our grassroots organizing strategies, a lot of the times employers think about an individual and they're like, oh, you're undocumented, like you have no rights. Really, making the individual lay into fear or sink into fear and anxiety. But when they know that an organization is backing them up, the employer is more willing to pay up what they owe. If they're not, then we do it tactical ways. We sometimes show up at the employer's home or at the employer's company to demand that they pay the worker. We also write letters. We get the city elected officials or Multnomah County elected officials to support with those efforts as well. But right now, we are part of a lot of different coalitions, including the Deportation Defense Coalition that is working on rapid response, which Ellie, I think, was chatting a little bit more about what that means, making sure that folks are showing up when we hear rumors around ICE or immigration officials being somewhere where folks are getting attacked, and making sure folks are, volunteering to be dispatchers, to be legal observers, making sure that they are part of those rapid response strategies. We're also part of NDLON. Again, we're a founding member of the National Day Labor Organizing Network, and they gather all of the day labor centers all around the country. And we're focused on creating comités populares, which is like a leadership committee leading various work. Right now, VOS is involved in communications, in rapid response, and in political education. Making sure
Wow.
making sure that all of that gets moving, that we are teaching our folks, and that we're doing rapid response training for all of our members. We serve in a year 1,302 folks. So it's a lot of humans that we're serving in addition to their families and the folks that they know. So once we have a committee around rapid response, where folks know their rights, where folks know how to show up when they're being dispatched to different locations, or being able to interact with ICE or immigration officials to stop a deportation from happening, making sure that folks' rights are not being violated.
Thank you very much, Carla.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate all that information. I'm wondering if the three of you are ready if I move on to another question. Okay. So one very specific question is, what's the best thing that churches can do to help? But I'm going to let that just sit there, because the second question may also include some of that. A compliment. All of the speakers have been excellent. It's great that Oregon for All is positioning to be prepared for whatever comes. The question is, can ICE come into churches and schools if they are not locked? I heard today from a pastor in Salem that ICE cannot come into a locked building. Should schools and churches and public spaces just stay locked and not open the doors to ICE? Would any one of the three of you like to answer that one?
I'm happy to jump in unless Carla, I saw you unmute, so I'm happy to defer to you.
No, go for it.
I think so. As I mentioned earlier, there was kind of a secure locations memo that essentially prevented ICE from going into secure locations, which included churches, schools, courthouses, and that has been since removed from the existing administration guidance. That doesn't mean that schools and churches cannot protect themselves. Schools, churches, courthouses can still remain locked, and they still have rights for ICE not showing up into their locations. And so, yes, they can remain locked. The other thing is that a lot of these spaces are private property, and so even if ICE attempts to go into these places, you all still have rights Innovation Law Lab through our work with Oregon for All and the coalition. We're actually putting together we put together a safeguarding organizations toolkit. We're going to launch this week a safeguarding schools toolkit to help schools kind of understand what the new memo means and what rights they still have. They still have things like FERPA that protect student information from being shared without the consent of parents. And so even if an ICE official comes to look for somebody, they are actually legally required to not share that information unless the parent has already given them permission to do so. And so there are, things that are protecting them from sharing information or from ICE showing up at their locations. And schools and churches can always turn away ICE officials. And so after we kind of share that safeguarding schools guidance, churches is going to be another area that we want to be able to provide a toolkit and some guidance for, given the changes kind of in the laws about what ICE can do, but really recognizing what you all do. And I think, given that there are constitutional rights around religion and churches, I think that there is actually more security that churches have that maybe schools don't, if in that regard, because those things are protected by the Constitution.
Thank you, Isa. Ellie, I wonder if you'd like to take the next question. There have been a couple about the rapid response team and how they're supporting families and children in case parents are arrested, similar to the team in Washington. And another question here, just in general about the rapid response team. What we're basically doing in case of children.
Yeah, kind of like I mentioned, yeah, that is all encapsulated in a rapid response structure. Again, the purpose of that structure is to protect the family. So any member of the family, that includes, children and families. I also, oh, sorry, I heard some talking. I also saw, another question in the chat of just thinking about, some of the aftercare to like an ICE interaction. And yeah, I was saying this earlier too, but the aftermath of a situation is definitely a part of the rapid response structure. So we're talking about mutual aid and other direct service resources to provide to families to help them stabilize after a situation happens. Mental health and other general well-being resources are definitely included in that. It's just a matter of, again, coordinating those direct services and making sure that we have a solid network that is able to deploy those resources as needed. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else specifically you want me to talk about rapid response, but I guess just answering that is yes, rapid response does include protecting the family.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So I see others are coming in and answering some of the question. Dana made a note about a sign that is circulating in the faith community that we can post that says we are a private property and ICE and Homeland Security cannot enter without a warrant. And she also goes on to say it looks as though the Quakers are taking a case to protect sanctuary in religious institution early in the making. Isa, did you hear about that? I saw you nodding.
Yeah, we've heard of a few different possible lawsuits that will come around religious institutions and sanctuary, as there are, like I mentioned, constitutional rights that protect you all from, it being like to be sanctuary locations and protect you all from ICE actions. And so we have heard about the one from the Quakers, and then also heard about a couple others that may be popping up kind of at the national level too.
Excellent. There's a question, what do each of you most need from those of us who have joined in on this meeting?
I can start. Mostly because I have a very direct ask. Again, is just making sure that y'all are supporting the community and making sure that we, each of us uses our own privilege. Just like Isa and Ellie were talking about, hearing all of these news is really exhausting. And especially if you're living this realities, it's even harder. So I myself am undocumented or documented. And even having DACA comes with a lot of privilege. So just like reading the news or knowing that your family or yourself is in danger is just really hard. And it's just mentally exhausting as we are continuing this fight. So please make sure that if you're able or have a friend, make sure to hire day laborers. All of them are, 98% of them are undocumented or refugees or folks with a criminal record or like hustlers, and they really need your support in these moments, especially in these moments. And I think one act of solidarity can just be hiring a day labor. The other thing I would say is joining these rapid response programs. There's a ton of them that are in the works, but also some of them that are really established, like the Portland Immigrant and Refugee Coalition or Immigrant Rights Coalition. And they have a rapid response, a hotline. They're actually looking for folks that are willing to take calls. And also for people to get dispatch. So when someone calls in a hotline, making sure that folks are actively showing up there to be legal observers, to be note takers. So just get involved with the rapid response hotline and, answer some calls and let's show up for community. But those are my two asks.
Thank you, Carla. Anything to add, Ellie or Isa?
Yeah, I would love to add on to that. I really appreciate Carla lifting up the PERC hotline. That was something I failed to mention earlier in the presentation. That is so the PERC hotline, which Isa put in the chat earlier, is kind of right now the place to go for reporting. Just reporting, making reports, and it's folks can call that line to get any sort of like support based on their circumstances. Right now, the Oregon for All Coalition is really trying to support PERC in staffing and scaling up. Right now, they're mostly based in Portland, so we're trying to ensure they get support to just be a presence statewide for folks. And as Carla was saying, that's going to involve just, recruiting as many dispatchers and folks willing to, be deployed in those volunteer capacities that I was mentioning earlier in the future. And then, as I was kind of saying earlier too, we right now are focused on coordinating organizations, but in that organizational coordination, we're definitely relying on our CBOs, our community-based organizations, to be engaging with their own volunteer base and just disseminating this information as far and wide as possible. So I would encourage folks again to just visit the Oregon for All website and sign up for our email blast as this structure gets built more and more, and we have more of this like coordination of volunteer trainings and places for volunteers to show up outside of like PERC and some of these other rapid response networks. We definitely want to be able to communicate that to you all. And then just like further collaboration, like feel free to reach out to me. My email's on our website as well. And I would love to just continue working with your congregation and with, all the folks you all are connected to as well.
Thank you, Ellie. I don't know if there's much time. Isa, did you have anything to respond to this? Okay.
I think they covered it. Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's time for Dana Buell to give us a little bit of a summary of where we are in the Unitarian Church in Portland and raise any issues that we might need to address. So Dana, I believe you're here, and Amina, you can highlight her.
Hello.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have a lot more to say than what we've already heard today, except that yeah, we've been getting a lot of questions about whether First Unitarian is a sanctuary church, and there's clearly a lot of misunderstanding and hope put into this idea of sanctuary. And I think the older imagination of that is that churches would be a place where people could come and live. And as we know, that really hasn't been the biggest priority over these last 8 years or more. So we are just gearing up. I mean, what our Immigrant Justice Action Group is focusing on is keeping us on top of making sure that we know what the community needs are, and that we're staying in relationship with community organizations like we're seeing here today. And that we will be, Reverend Allison, I think, is on here as well today. We're talking about what we can do in terms of educating everybody about what our rights are and what it means to be able to address Homeland Security or ICE if they did show up. But obviously there are going to be some really good trainings in the community that I hope many of us will participate in. And so I think primarily as a sanctuary church, we did declare ourselves a sanctuary church in the new sanctuary movement back in 2017. And really what that means is we're committing ourselves to all of the things that were spoken about today, helping with advocacy, helping with rapid response, getting ourselves trained, and just really being in support of all of the groups that are most impacted and doing the direct work. I think that covers it. Yeah.
Thank you, Dana. I'm noticing that we have more resources listed now in the chat. I believe these will all be sent out to all the participants. Someone mentioned Theo mentioned having hired day laborers and finding it a very worthwhile thing to do. And of course, the day laborer is more than happy to take a little more than $20 an hour. That makes sense. And is there, regarding hiring day laborers, is there a go-to visual regarding actual judge issued warrant versus heavyweight policing, claiming warrant and script to have on hand? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. If one of the presenters understands the question, maybe you'd like to address that.
I have a follow-up to that question, or a clarifying question. Are you asking if we're preparing employers in case ICE shows up at the job site?
We'll wait and see if Heather puts anything more in the chat.
If that is the case, we are actively preparing employers to protect our workers. So we are working this week to provide a little toolkit for our employers around knowing their rights and how to protect our workers, including what an actual warrant looks like, and making sure that they know that it needs to be signed by a judge in order for it to be valid. We're also giving all of our members Know Your Rights training every Friday. So every Friday they're getting training on Know Your Rights. And they also have little red cards as well to make sure that they carry those wherever they go. So our workers are definitely prepared. And this week we are working on making sure that our employers are also well prepared since they are going to be hiring workers that could be at risk or targeted.
Thank you, Carla. All right. There is a question. Oh, were you going to say something, Catherine?
I was going to do the closing, but if you want to insert another question, go ahead.
I think, well, we actually just have a minute. We'll see how quickly the speakers can respond to this one. If local police are not following sanctuary laws, are we allowed to take a photo of their badge or any other way identify them to the sanctuary hotline? Same for ICE agents if they are doing something that is not okay. Isa, Carla, or Ellie, do you have any thoughts on that particular question?
Yeah, I tried to provide an answer in the chat, but there is a place on the DOJ website where people can report sanctuary promise violations. So I dropped the link in the chat. But yes, you can report any local law enforcement that is violating our state sanctuary law, and we actually encourage anybody who sees our state either sheriffs or police officers who are violating our state sanctuary law to report those things so that they can be held accountable and at least receive additional training as to what the laws are that they need to abide by.
Thank you, Isa. Sorry, I had missed your follow-up there. Go ahead, Catherine. I think that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, on behalf of both RJAG and IJAG, thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening to explore this important and unfortunately critically timely issue. We're especially grateful for the information and insight shared by our excellent panel members, Isa, Carla, and Ellie. Tonight's program is the first in a three-part series. The next Zoom event is March 4th, and it will focus on legislative advocacy as Oregon's biennial long session gears up. The topics to be covered in the third session on May 6th are still under discussion. Here's how you can contact Advancing Racial Justice Action Group and Immigrant Justice Action Group. You can use the RJAG email to sign up for emails about our activities, as well as other church and community activities related to racial justice. IJAG also disseminates valuable information and timely event and action notices. These email addresses appear in the chat as well. And as Marianne has said, also in the chat and coming to you by email is a resource list of local and regional grassroots organizations, and she's described that to you. So in closing, let me say, this promises to be a perilous time for a great many people who, like so many others before them, came to America full of hope, ambition, and dreams of better life for themselves and their children. They are, by definition, courageous people, but they need and deserve our support. We'd like to close with these words from the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers and sisters. Good night. Thank you. Best wishes.
Okay.